This is my audience, guys. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ah, you're the one who waved. Good job. Here you go. Okay, so hi guys. So today I'm going to talk to you guys about mandatory voting in the U.S. So, how many of you guys voted in the last election?
None.
One. Are you guys registered to vote?
I think.
I don't know.
Okay.
I guess.
Are you guys gonna vote in the next election? 2016 election?
Depends on who's running.
Okay, so according to ABC, the voter turnout for 2008 and 2004 elections were worse than 2011 elections. 12 elections, sorry. So mandated voting is needed to secure the respectability and genuinity of voting in the United States for the people we put into office. So mandatory voting or compulsory voting started in Athens, Greece. What happened was they required their citizens to vote and participate in their legislative elections, but did not require them to show up to meetings. So it'd be like the equivalent of us going to the council meetings. Not going to the council meetings, but voting in our local elections. So currently, the reason why we need mandatory voting is to make our elections valid. Currently, only 60% of the U.S. voting eligible population votes, which that means 40% of us are not being represented. So that's kind of like saying 40% of us are not being taken care of. That's basically what we're saying. More Republicans vote than Democrats. Generally, that's because they're more well-to-do, and political officials know that the well-to-do are the ones who vote, so they represent their issues. So therefore, the wealthy population are the ones who can gain from voting. So they're the ones who generally vote. They're generally wealthy Caucasian business owners. Those that don't vote generally make less than $50,000. Those that vote, the wealthy that vote, wealthy meaning if you're making $50,000 or above, generally you vote. Those who don't vote are making $50,000 or less because their issues or positions are not being represented. So they don't see an incentive to vote. They're the working class. Minorities are also least likely to vote. This is for two reasons. One, we have two groups of minorities. We have those that are legal and illegal. So if you're illegal, the buck stops there. You can't vote. Or you can't vote. If you're illegal, you either have a student visa, permanent resident card, green card. That tier of people also, they're in the country legally, but they cannot vote. So I feel like the U.S. should make it to where those people who are here in the country for long periods of time should be able to vote. Because they're paying taxes, they're putting into the sales tax in the U.S., they're contributing to the U.S. economy. Here in Texas, they're contributing to the Texas economy, but they're not being represented. So they should also be able to vote. So that needs to be changed. Mandatory voting would prompt Americans more likely to pay attention to elections. If you are competing, if you have invested in a horse race, then you're going to pay attention to the horse race. But if you have not contributed or if you haven't betted on any horse, unless your horse is actually running, you're not going to pay attention. So the same thing works in politics today and elections today. People who are standing for your positions and issues, you're going to pay attention to if they're running or not, and you're going to go and vote for them or pay attention to platforms. But those who are not being represented, they're not going to pay attention. If we have mandatory voting, then you have 40% of people of the voting age population, voting eligible population, that are new voters. They're going to pay attention to the political parties and platforms, and that means those candidates are going to have to pay attention to their wants and needs. So they're going to have something to gain from elections. Those that pay attention to politics have more of an initiative to vote. They feel like they can actually change America. They have more of an incentive to vote because they feel like they can do something, they can respond, they can affect their local and state governments. Those who don't pay attention don't have an incentive to vote at all. Population makeup at the polls are misrepresented. In the U.S., we have a huge minority population, but if you look at the voting polls, it's like they're almost not even there. Caucasians are being overrepresented and minorities are being underrepresented, particularly Latino voters. There's a huge Latino population here in the state of Texas, but they're not voting, and they're also not being represented at the polls. there are only 30% of Texas votes, and those are those Caucasian wealthy landowners. Caucasians are the ones that generally tend to be more eligible to vote. A lot of Latinos here in Texas, either they're illegal or they're on visas or something, and they're not eligible to vote. But Caucasians are generally naturally born here, so they have the ability to vote. Many Americans fought and died for a right to vote. So a long time ago, the right to vote used to be really, it had a lot of value to it. It was very important because they knew their forefathers had more of an incentive to vote, and they had to fight for that. Today, it's not as important. It's more taken up as granted, so people no longer vote as much today. The privilege of suffrage should be exercised and upheld, especially in the areas that have people who don't vote as much, because generally, if your parents have voted, you are more inclined to vote. But if your parents have not voted, you weren't brought up with that type of initiative to vote. So the voting population is more likely to financially support politicians. Those who can have their platforms supported, what they want to be done, or what they feel is more important to society, and if those issues are being represented by one of the politicians, they're going to want that candidate to win, and they're going to want that candidate to be financially supported. So from a political office holder's side, you want to be able to represent a wide variety of issues because you can get more campaign money. So that would be an incentive for a political officer to represent more platforms. Mandatory voting would also enable equal value of each vote. If you only have a certain class of people voting, then that means their vote's more precious than those who are not voting up, the new voters. If everyone was voting, or if we had mandatory voting, then everyone's vote would be held equal. You have to represent each person with an equal platform. So it would be more likely to, everyone would feel more that they can change politics today because they would have a realization that their vote means something. So as you can see, mandatory voting could dramatically influence the U.S. politics in a positive way. Who knows, maybe in the next election we might have mandatory voting, but until then, let's vote and enjoy the elections. Yay!